Commissioner Andor, thank you very much again for speaking to ESF-Works today during your current visit. What brings you here today?
Well, I came to see a project supported by the European Social Fund, which helps offenders, mainly young offenders, to reintegrate in society and helping them developing skills and, if possible, giving them jobs. And of course, it's very difficult to make this journey, but there are many important steps by which the trainers, the organizers of this project, which is called Back on Track, can help these people on this journey.
As you said, the project that we're visiting here today is particularly targeted on work with offenders. What's particularly struck you about what you've seen today?
Well, I understand, and also because I spent previously some time in Manchester, that especially in the 1980s, but also later, crime was a serious problem. But there are various forms of crime. There is one which is dealt with by sentences shorter than 1 year, and we see mainly people in this category here. Many of them not going or not having spent time in prison, but being on probation, but still needing help. Also because purely the fact of the criminal record is not the best starting point for an interview or for starting a search for a job. But this is also just one of the obstacles. To write a CV, for example, for people who didn't have a job before, may be a difficult task. And the participants here receive a lot of assistance to make all these steps, to develop all these skills. It requires a huge amount of work from those who organize and run this organization, but they have a lot of experience. I learned they started about 35 years ago, and in the recent period they received support from the European Social Fund, and I'm very glad that the ESF can support such an important cause. It was really striking that they received a lot of moral support, not to give up, but really to invest in more and more steps to get closer to passing this first barrier. And once it's done, once the first job is gained, I think there is already a better starting point for further developing a career.
The Commission's just published its proposals on the future of the structural funds and the European Social Fund beyond 2014. There's lots and lots of detail in there, but perhaps you could summarise the main points for us.
For me, it was very important that the European Social Fund is reinforced for the next financial period after 2014, because it's clear that the ambitions which we have on the EU level, increasing the rate of employment, reducing the number of those citizens who live in poverty or at risk of poverty, this needs financial support. And the key financial instrument to support this is the European Social Fund. So our proposal, which was published a couple of weeks ago, increased the volume of the European Social Fund. There are minimum thresholds defined on a regional level, on a regional basis, to allocate money to the social fund, exactly because job creation doesn't simply come from the market forces. You need to invest in skills, you need to help developing the demand for jobs, you have to improve the capacity of the employment services, public and private, and civil society capacity, and all this requires support. So this in itself, that the ESF has now an increased volume and visibility, and guarantees that the authorities actually devote funds to employment and social inclusion. And we also suggested that a minimum 20% should be allocated to social inclusion purposes. I think it guarantees that the agreed objectives and targets of the Europe 2020 strategy to increase employment, to reinforce school attendance, and to reduce poverty will be supported financially.
So if you were at a project like this, what would look different? How would things be different under the new proposals?
We also introduced a huge number of simplifications. And I believe beneficiaries like this project will also benefit from the simplifications, because very often projects implemented by NGOs are relatively smaller ones, and the administrative burden so far has been sometimes excessive. And then it's a double burden, because it can be a burden when the application takes place and you have to demonstrate your capacity, and also it can be a burden the implementation period, and in addition to that also when the audit comes. So we really listen to the beneficiaries, all the stakeholders, those who organize and design and implement and supervise the programs, and try to develop a more simple, more transparent, easily manageable ESF for the next period. It's also very important that it will be better coordinated with the other funds, because very often it may be the case that you need new facilities, or when you want to redevelop a part of a city which may have difficult neighborhoods like Manchester, you may need to draw from the Regional Development Fund and the ESF as well. And it's important that the authorities can do it more easily.
It's obviously up for negotiation at the moment before a final result is arrived at. What do you think the main issues will be? What are the main points of difference there'll be during the negotiations, do you think?
Well, there have been, before we made the proposal, in the last 18 months, but also since it was published, discussions about conditionality. And this is an area where there are many sensitivities. I think it is important to demonstrate that we can improve the result, the effectiveness of the EU funds. This is very often criticized, and I don't want to deny that sometimes the criticism is legitimate, because we have seen indeed some projects beforehand where it was not efficient enough, not fast enough. There was training, but not necessarily in a way to respond to the actual economic environment and the needs of businesses in a given neighborhood. So we have to ensure that the projects are designed in a way that respond better to the real opportunities, and prepare people for what is really waiting for them. But we cannot leave everything just to the future activities. So we have to think ahead and ensure that this conditionality is fair, and it's developed in a kind of mutual understanding between the Commission and the authorities.
And what's the likely timetable until we get to a final result?
By the end of next year, the negotiations would come to a conclusion, and there would be a final multi-annual financial framework with a European Social Fund reinforced in it.
Perhaps we can talk to you again then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.